Hello everyone, welcome to Conversations on Ichnology. The International Ichnological Association is pleased to offer this lecture cycle to all those interested in ichnology. The lectures will take place every last Friday of each month until November, and we will always seek a compatible time with most regions of the world so that more and more people can participate. Thank you for joining us for this third lecture. Also, thank you to IIA members for their support of our association. The IIA is committed to assisting as many students as possible in participating in ICNIA 2028, and more members are needed to accomplish this goal. Beginning this year, IIA provided new member categories to make memberships more accessible to all. Thus, we invite those who are not yet members to join the International Ichnological Association. About today's talk, Dr. Jens Lallensack obtained his PhD in Geosciences at the University of Bonn, Germany in 2018. His work focuses on fossil tracks, particularly those of dinosaurs, with a strong emphasis on methodology, including photogrammetry, statistics, and programming. He has developed algorithms to define track margins objectively and to calculate gaits based on variation patterns in long trackways. He also worked on the cranial osteology of basal sauropodomorphs. He is currently a postdoc at the Computer Science Department of the Federal University of Minas Gerais, Belo Horizonte, Brazil, where he explores uses of machine learning AI to study tracks, a work that is funded by the Alexander von Humboldt Foundation. Thanks, Jens, for accepting this invitation.
Thanks a lot, Noelia, for the introduction, and thanks everybody for coming. It's an honor to give this talk today for you. Just let me share the screen. I hope you can all see it.
Yes,
Great.
perfectly.
So, today I will first briefly say what actually is AI, machine learning, deep learning, what's the difference between them, how does AI work to build a very basic idea. Then I talk about some possible uses in technology. Then I also talk about when we should not use AI. So for most research problems, it's probably not the ideal method. So what are the issues and limitations here? And finally, I talk about my current project here in Brazil, similarity learning on dinosaur tracks. So what is the difference between AI, machine learning, and deep learning? So artificial intelligence can be seen as the field of study, and that includes the method, that's machine learning, and deep learning is a subset of machine learning, and it's just a very complex and very advanced method of machine learning that has multiple layers and a complex neural network. And this deep learning can be categorized into a discriminative AI, which is like anything that, like for example, can be used for classification to tell apart this image is of a dog and this other is of a bird or something. And then we have generative AI, like this includes ChatGPT and all these things. So discriminative AI will return numbers, and this generative AI will return text, images, and so on. So that's the easiest way to distinguish between the two. So how does that work? So basically, one of the most simple methods of machine learning is linear regression. So a method we are all familiar with, and here we fit a line to a data set, simply speaking. And yeah, in linear regression, we have a precise formula which we can use to fit the line, but we can also do it in an iterative process where we start with the random orientation of the line and then step by step rotate and shift the line until we fit these point cloud. And the method we use for that is called gradient descent. And everything in AI is basically just that. It's a very basic optimizing an objective function. So the takeaway here is that AI is all about optimizing something. There's no actually intelligence involved. Yeah, it's all an optimization problem. Good. So first, let's define some terms here.
Jens,
Yeah.
Jens, sorry to interrupt you, but we still see the Zoom bar on the top of your screen. Maybe if you
Oh.
share the PDF instead of sharing the whole screen, maybe that would work.
I can try.
So sharing just the PDF and not the whole screen, maybe.
Yeah. Okay, better?
Yes. Yeah,
Okay,
that's
perfect.
good. Thank you.
So, the part of our data set we fit this line to is called we call it the training set. The line itself we can call the AI model. And the process of fitting the line, so this iterative process of fitting the line to the data set, it's called training. So, and during training, this model learns from the data. So this is a basic terminology. So let's talk about some example uses of AI in Ichnology. So the most common, or one of the most common applications of AI is automatization of tedious tasks. For example, detection and classification of large numbers of ichnofossils, segmentation of CT data, and so on. But can we actually use deep learning directly to solve research problems? And this is what I'm going to focus on this talk. So the first example and the first study I did with AI is to discriminate between tracks of theropod and ornithopod dinosaurs. Both look quite similar, and often it's very difficult to distinguish them. And this is a problem of image classification. So we have two data sets, one of the theropods, the other of the ornithopods, ornithischians, and train the model to just distinguish between these images. So this can be quite controversial. A good example is this track waveform LAR query that has been hypothesized to have caused a stampede. And there have been a couple of papers arguing if this is an theropod track maker or an ornithopod track maker. So the model that we trained was quite convincing. We tested it on an independent data set, and we gave the same data set to 5 human experts who all have published multiple papers on precisely these tridactyl tracks. And the neural network, so the model was consistently better than the humans here. So this shows there's quite some potential in machine learning. And the model even discovered a new feature that was not previously recognized to distinguish between these types of tracks, which is the curvature of the middle digit. And we can a little bit explore what the model actually has learned by this model called GradCam, which can highlight the areas in the image that were important for model evaluation. Okay. The next example is generating outlines. So this is something I might have in mind for the future. It's not something I've actually done. So the problem here is that defining the outline or even a measurement of a track can be quite difficult and subjective because the track gradually fades with the surrounding sediment. So different interpreters will draw different outlines. And of course, this is a problem if you want to apply objective methods because you have objective methods because you have subjective data. And a good example is one trackway here, one track from La Query, the contentious trackway. Here, Peter Falkingham, who thinks it is a theropod, draws a very theropod-like outline, while here Anthony Romilio, who thinks it's an ornithopod, draws a more ornithopod-like outline. So, but it's the same track. So this shows there's quite some subjectivity. To address this in a paper some years ago, I tried to program hard coding like an algorithm to draw an objective track outline automatically based on a 3D model. I claim that these resulting outline is objective because it's based on an objective set of criteria. However, this method works for most tracks, but not for all tracks, because there's a lot of special cases where it just fails because tracks are highly complex. So, so the use of this is a bit limited. And deep learning would have been a better solution for this problem, for this reason, because it can better deal with this complexity. But there's a catch. Would an AI-generated track outline be objective? And my take is probably not, because it's no longer based on an objective set of criteria. But at the very least, we would have no bias based on context, just as location or time. The result would be repeatable. And we could train multiple different models to create multiple different outlines to estimate the errors. So it would certainly help to make this whole thing more objective. Now let's talk about limitations of AI and why you possibly should not use deep learning to solve your research problem. Reason one is that the simpler approach is often the best. For example, in this basic discrimination problem, a simple linear function provides a decent separation between these classes, while a very powerful function, and AI models are very powerful models, provides a perfect separation, but basically just by learning all these points by heart. So it is too powerful for this simple problem, and that's an issue we call overfitting. So that means this function applied to a new data set will perform worse than our simple line here. So in AI, a more powerful, a larger model and a longer training time is not necessarily better. It all depends on the complexity of the problem we actually want to solve. I think this quote here nails it quite nicely. AI is the second best option, solution to any research problem, but the best is to actually understand the problem. Because we can never be sure exactly what the AI model is actually doing in many cases. Another issue or limitation of AI is shortcut learning, and this can be quite challenging to deal with. Let's say we have a complex input data such as an image, and only a small fraction of the features you can find in the image is actually features we want the model to learn. And the bulk of the features is something the model should not learn. And very tricky are shortcut features, which are features that help to solve the problem, but it's not something we want the model to learn. For example, there have been cases with cancer detection software where the model looked at if there's a ruler in the image to classify the image as cancer or not cancer, which is, of course, not what we want. And for my particular problem, I had this problem of shortcut learning with outlines that are separated with separated digital pads here, and full outlines, which is basically just a function of substrate consistency. So if the foot sinks in deeper into the sediment, we get this full outline. And if it's a shallow footprint, we get this separated outline. So it's not something we want the model to learn. And this shortcut learning is especially problematic if the features of interest are subtle, if there's much variability or noise in the data, if the sample size is limited, and if the data is biased in some way. And unfortunately, in ichnology and paleontology, these are very common problems. So I now go into one example, a study I did. And this is an example where AI is probably not a good solution. And this is gait analysis. So in modern mammals, you can find different gaits, for example, the pace gait, where two limbs on the same side of the body move simultaneously, or the trot, where the diagonal limbs move simultaneously. And we cannot directly tell this from trackways. But my idea here was that we get a signal when the track maker accelerates or decelerates, because then some measurements increase faster than other measurements. And to figure this out, this was a lot of work, a lot of try and error, took 2 years. So, but finally we arrived at a quite simple method to quite precisely estimate this limb phase, we call it, from trackways. And we validated it based on modern mammals, and the validation looked quite good. So the result for sauropod track maker, let me, as this doesn't play, let me show another video. Okay. Okay, is this video coming through? I hope so. Do you see something?
Not yet.
Oh,
Not yet. Okay. Then let me try again.
Mm.
Okay.
Now
you
we
can
see.
it.
We see
Great.
the toolbar on top, but it's fine, I think.
Yeah, this would be it's an animation done by my co-author Peter Fockingham. So animating how this sauropod would work based on our calculations based on trackways. So it's the first time we can actually say how the limbs moved in relation to each other in a dinosaur. So let's continue with music. Okay, here we go. So the question is, would deep learning be an easier and more accurate approach here? And I think if we train it based on trackways of modern mammals, it should work perfectly well in principle. But the issue is here that mammals are not dinosaurs. So we're optimizing towards a proxy, but we cannot tell when we are over-optimizing to the proxy. And the problem here is that we lack this theoretical framework that if we do it like this, we don't actually understand what the model is doing. And the issue then is, of course, we can't tell if the estimates for dinosaurs are actually correct. So this could be quite useless in this case. So finally, let's talk about our current approach on dinosaur tracks. So we have a lot of problems with applying statistical methods on dinosaur tracks. One problem is defining the track outlines we already talked about. The other problem is that in ichnotaxonomy, we are interested in anatomy, but a track is the result of a lot of different things, not only anatomy, but also substrate properties, post-formational alteration, behavior and foot kinematics, and so on. So we need a lot of expertise to interpret which of these features are related to the anatomy, to what degree. So actually, we would like take the footprint and reconstruct the anatomy of the foot. And all of this taken together introduces a lot of subjectivity. And the result is we see it in, especially in theropod ichnotaxonomy, that we have a lot of oversplitting here. And this is a problem that has been, is known since, I think, 50 years. And there is no real solution to that. We have a lot of ichnotaxa explaining quite limited variation. So the idea was now to have an AI model to sort it out, basically. As data format, we stick with the outlines rather than 3D models, because the 3D models would be much more complex. And the issue here is, even though it would work in principle and would have many advantages, the issue here is that it also offers a lot more shortcut features. It's more of a black box that we cannot really control if the model actually learned what we intended the model to learn. This is a bit easier with the outlines. So in our approach, we use a method called similarity learning. So we are not interested in like a classification so that the model says, oh, is this ichnotaxon or is that ichnotaxon? No, we actually are interested in products that the model calculates internally, which are called embeddings. So these are a set of numbers, like in our case, like 200 numbers, that describe a given track in terms of relevant features. So ideally, these would be anatomical features we are interested in. It's like an ichnological description, just put in numbers in a very abstract way. And these numbers we can then plot after reducing the dimensionality. So this is UMAP, which is the projection of the high-dimensional data. So for each point, we have basically 200 numbers, so we have to reduce them to just 2 numbers. We can also use like principal component analysis to have the same effect, but this UMAP is better suited for this kind of data. And the training approach here is we divide the data set into an anchor, which is like one image. Then the next image is a positive example. So the same species as the anchor. And we also have the negative example, which is a different species. So the model is then trained to minimize the distance between Ancho and positive example and maximize the distance between Ancho and negative example. The obvious problem here is, of course, how can we tell if some track is the same species or a different species? So actually, we usually don't know this for dinosaur tracks, so we need some proxy here to get to a similar result. So the most obvious and easiest solution would be to just use a priori defined ichnotaxa. We did this in this example. So this is the resulting UMAP plot. You see we got quite a nice separation between some of the ichnotaxa. However, already here we see that other ichnotaxa, for example, Cerangospodos, Chankvipus, or here this Rhinoceropus, are quite overlapping the other ichnotaxa and cannot really be distinguished. I have to say here that we can get a perfect separation here between these classes because we show the same classes that the model is trained on. But then we run into the issue of overfitting. So the goal here is not to get a perfect separation. Still, the issue remains that here we can also highlight the type specimens of each ichnotaxon, and this can also be interesting. For example, here Eubrontes, the type specimen is quite on the margin of the larger Eubrontes cluster. So it's so this shows that this type specimen might not be representative for what we usually would call Eubrontes. The problem with this approach is we get a circular argument because we train the model on ichnotaxonomic labels to say something about ichnotaxonomy. Of course, this can tell us a little bit. For example, if this model is still not able to distinguish between these ichnotaxa, then we have a problem. But if the model is able to distinguish between the ichnotaxa, that does not mean that the ichnotaxa are actually different. So to address this issue, we tried a second approach, which is completely independent of the ichnotaxonomy, but uses two proxies instead, which is tracks of modern birds of known species and fossil tracks from a single locality that are likely produced by the same track maker species. Like this tracks here from the same trackway, which are of course produced by the same individual. So both proxies have limitations. They are not perfect. Like the bird proxy has the limitations that birds are not dinosaurs. They are similar, but it's something else. The locomotion is different. The preservation is different. So it's not the same. The second proxy has the problem that tracks from a single locality can be expected to vary less than tracks from separate localities. So we are likely to somewhat underestimate the variability that we can actually expect in a species. So these are the limitations, but we hope that if combining both, we can still get to a reasonable approximation. So the result looks like this. It looks a lot more messy than the plot based on the ichnotaxa. But again, this is completely independent of these ichnotaxa labels we show here. And achieving a good separation is not the goal. The goal is to produce something completely independent and see if we can still distinguish these ichnotaxa. But what about the issue with shortcut learning here? And we indeed have the problem that the model tends to not only look at the features we want, but to some degree also takes into account the separated outlines and the full outline, even though it might be the same track. And to solve this issue, we finally went for this approach using synthetic data. So we start out with the real track, and I programmed a script that automatically produces a lot of hundreds of different tracks where the features we are interested in remain constant, but the shortcut features vary. And here's another example how this looks with another track. And basically we start out with like a set of coordinates to define a track, draw circles. Then we have some operations to draw circles in between and smooth the whole thing, and then add some noise and then reduce the resolution. And at the end, we get to a reasonably realistic looking track. And yes, in this way, we can produce a lot of data for the model. And the result, just trained on the synthetic data, looks like this. Of course, it looks a lot messier, but the basic topology can still be seen, that we also see in the other models. The problem with this method is, of course, that it does not learn from actual data, so it cannot know which features might be more important than others to discriminate the tracks. So in our final approach, we are combining the real data and the synthetic data. The key point here is that the training set with the synthetic data should be much easier than the real data set, so that the model will learn from the real data, and the synthetic data only acts as a control that prevents the model from going into the shortcut features. So we train the same model with these two separate data sets. So we give the model a batch of the real data set. Afterwards, we give it a batch of the synthetic data set, and so on, and then iterate between the two. The result looks like this. Actually, it reflects the current Ichno taxonomy better than all other independent approaches. And yeah, this is the final model we went with. One potential issue here is that these points often include tracks from the same locality. So here we took the mean of the embeddings for each locality, so that each point reflects one particular locality only, to avoid potential bias. Okay, so what can we finally do with this method? And the first application here is to highlight inconsistencies in Ichno taxonomy. So it makes issues with the current Ichno taxonomy quite evident. For example, this Ichno taxon Asianopodus here is defined based on the size of the metatarsophalangeal pad. So this end here is thick, and then it's this Ichno taxon basically. This is the main feature to identify this as Asianopodus. However, in another Ichno taxon, Megalosaurus, this feature does not play any role at all. So this Ichno genus includes like tracks with a very large pad and tracks with a very small pad. So this is an inconsistency that then leads to here these points, these Megalosaurus with a large pad, to plot inside the field of this Asianopodus. So this kind of problems can be easily identified. We also have some cases where we can confirm hypotheses made in the literature. Application number 2 is nearest neighbor analysis. So we can give the model an example track and ask it to return the most similar tracks from the data set. So our data set has over 3,000 different tracks, so a lot to choose from. In this example, I'm interested in this track set from Peña Portillo in Spain, and I'm interested in what are the most similar tracks from all over the board. So what the model does is taking the mean embedding of all these tracks and return the tracks that are most similar to this mean embedding. So this can be quite helpful and also reduces subjectivity and bias, because the research has prompted to look at tracks from all over the world, from all different ages, not only from the tracks of the same region or time frame. Third application is tracking changes through space and time. This example, we plot only the Ornithischian tracks and color them based on time. So we have early Cretaceous, late Cretaceous, early Middle Jurassic, and late Jurassic. And what we see is that the Jurassic ones plot quite separate from the Cretaceous ones. And this reflects like the evolution from these small cursorial ornithopods towards the larger graviportal ornithopods of the Cretaceous. We can also apply this to geographical regions. An important hypothesis in dinosaur ichnology is that during the early Cretaceous, the ichnofauna of Eastern Asia was very distinct. And the idea is that this Eastern Asia was geographically isolated from the rest of the world to produce these unique ichnofauna. However, the body fossils do not really confirm this. And I myself was quite skeptical. For example, one ichnotaxon limited to East Asia is Asionopodus, what we already talked about. However, one track site I saw in Spain, I would say looks exactly like Asionopodus. And so in my view, Asionopodus does not seem to be limited to Asia at all. So what does the model say? The model actually says that there's a big difference between the tracks from Asia and the tracks from Europe and North America. So Asian tracks seem to occupy the whole plot, while North America and Europe are kind of restricted to the left side here. So apparently it seems to confirm the ichnotaxonomic hypothesis. However, South America kind of broadly overlaps with East Asia, even though it's geographically much more distant. So I was trying to figure out what morphological feature actually causes, what is the difference here? And it turns out it's mostly related to aspect ratio, so how elongated the track is. And if we take the same plot but just color the points based on length to width ratio, so the aspect ratio, we see the more elongated tracks plot here on the right, and the less elongated tracks plot on the left. And yeah, looking at this data, it does not seem that this could be caused by a unique ichnofauna. because we can expect these elongation differences to occur in different trackmaker groups. And I would now interpret it as a distinct ecomorphotype, like that we have in East Asia that just does not occur in Europe and North America, but also occurs in South America. And this ecomorphotype could be related to cursorial forms living in some inland environments. And we just don't have these inland environments preserved in Europe and North America. So this is my current idea here to explain this. That's it. I have to thank many people here, but more than all, I have to thank these four, and I have to thank you for your attention, and I'm open for any questions.
Thank you, Jens, for this great talk. We have time for a couple of questions. So if anybody...
Yeah,
has any
you
question.
should be able, everybody should be able to unmute themselves if
Okay.
they want. I think. And if not, you can also write question in the chat. I have a question actually, Jens. Do you have any way to discriminate or to give a different weight when you train the model? Do you have any way to give a different weight to the tracks that are poorly preserved versus the tracks that are very preserved, so that the model actually, learns better, or like weights better, the better preserved tracks?
That's a very good question, and something I want to address in the future. So at the moment we give it data, and it doesn't matter so we only give it like decent tracks of some quality, but this quality varies, of course. We have so la tracks, and we have very high fidelitas tracks. And yeah, there are several ideas here. We could train a separate model that just estimates quality, and then use that output to train the other model. So we have a little bit more control there, and can better evaluate this one step, evaluating the track, and then we can also try to combine it in a single model. But then to some point the model should figure that out by itself. If a track is just like, if you just try give it random shapes, it cannot find any features there. So this track will have no value for the model. So to some degree, it can figure out what is useful and what is not useful. But to have this additional step with actually estimating the quality would certainly be an improvement.
Yeah, that's interesting, because I was thinking, like, I mean, I never describe tracks, but I was thinking that usually you, as a person that looks at those, like usually you always like mentally trained to say, like, this is a poorly preserved, this is a better preserved, and then like you of course give better weight when you describe to the better preserved one. So yeah, it's and then I was also wondering, when you show, there is the track that you show at the beginning, when you said that the AI showed an area where it's actually an area of the track that was the most important to differentiating between tracks, right? Do you think that's a future way of using like that for ichnotaxonomy, like giving more weight to those characteristics? Yeah, that one. Yeah. Like, do you think that's useful in the future for like defining better taxobases?
Well, it can be very useful to see what the model actually has learned, and as an explorative method to detect new features. The issue is, of course, is always to train the model to actually learn features that are of relevance to us. and not some features we are not interested in. But yeah, this is like a way to find new features that could be useful to define Ichnotaxa. Yeah.
It's interesting. Well, thank you.
Well, thank you for a very interesting talk, Jens. I'm sorry my video is not working.
Thank you.
I'm impressed by the fact that we're not really doing science, are we? I mean, I've watched vertebrate ichnologists chalk outlines in the field in a way that some other ichnologists might not have done, and then photograph that, and that becomes a standard. So I agree with your analysis of this as not being repeatable. We have the same problems in invertebrate ichnology, of course. Well, wouldn't it be better to look at if we're going to take modern analogs or anchors, wouldn't it be better to start and end with mammal tracks than with dinosaur tracks, which are going to be inherently much more difficult?
Yeah, mammal tracks would of course be easier because we have the modern analogs, so we can completely train on the modern data. So only issue is here that fossils are different from tracks left in recent sediments. So this is something the model could potentially get confused with, but yeah, mammal tracks would definitely be a lot easier, but also a lot less interesting. So we don't really have a lot of needs there, because we can better compare with the modern tracks anyways.
Well, to train your your AI.
To train the AI to then apply to dinosaurs. Yeah, long-term goal is to like expand the data set so we can train a model on the mammals and on the tridactyl tracks simultaneously and on all other kinds of tracks to have a larger model. How much the model can learn from the mammals to estimate the dinosaurs, I'm skeptical because these tracks are quite different. So
Oh, that's not what I was proposing. I was simply saying that if you're trying to interest other people in using this approach, a mammalian approach would be much more convincing.
Probably yes. Yeah, as I said,
Sorry, maybe I can have a comment here about the thing that you told. Maybe the one option is that you use some pre-trained model. For instance, if you use some pre-trained model, maybe, I don't know, but maybe you can use, for instance, large language models that they are, for instance, they are trained with large data set. Then you can, for instance, this large language model for your specific task. So it can be one of the options, or other techniques that can be used for in this case, as I understood Andrew was mentioning.
Your words did not come out very clearly, Omid. I'm sorry.
I think the point here was that if we apply to mammals first, it can be better validated and we can better show that the method actually works.
Yes.
If we can show it, demonstrate it on mammals first. And yeah, I agree.
Sorry, I was saying that you told that train the method, for instance, train method using mammal data, then test on this case, right?
No, I think the point was that the member data is more is easier and better to validate.
Yes.
Anyway, this is great work. This is cutting edge work. I very much appreciate your talk. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
We also have a comment on the chat. I don't know, Ben, would you like to discuss something about your comment?
Let me read. Yeah, so the question was, how can we apply it to 3D tracks? So the issue with 3D tracks is that we have much more complexity involved. And yeah, my idea, so I think the only way to do it would be using synthetic data there as well to pre-train the model. So we can, I have the script to produce the synthetic data in 2D, and to make it in 3D would just be the next step. But it will be a lot more effort, of course, to include all kinds of variations that can happen in a real track. But it would be a good starting point for a model to pre-train to then use on an actual data set of fossil tracks. Yeah, so this might be the way to do it, but it's a lot of effort.
Sorry, maybe I didn't explain my idea well, because I work with, I know, because as you thought, you are the method with the simplest data, okay? Then you are going to evaluate it using the computer like that working on that. So in this case, you can, I am saying that we can use LLM, because there are techniques that LLM, they trained on large data sets. So they are pre-trained model that we can see how we can use LLM, large language model, to use in your specific tasks. Okay, because there are some methods that, for instance, they are used for visual or, for instance, classification using, for instance, VLM. So a good idea how we can use that task.
Okay, so of course we can use other methods that might be better than the similarity learning approach I use here, but this does not address the main issues that we face, the main limitations, which is about the data and not about the method itself, and about the proxies that we have to use.
Oh, I'm not hearing me. I'm writing the text in chat.
Thank you. There is also a question by Ronaldo. Jens?
Okay.
How do you evaluate the use of unsupervised segmentation for this problem?
Well, segmentation, I think that's a method that can be useful if you have a lot of data, like, for example, drill cores full of ichnofossils, and you cannot classify everything by hand. So is there an approach using deep learning can be useful to automate the process, to segment them automatically, and then add an ichnotaxon label automatically to it. So that would be, yeah, one of the common applications to automate tedious tasks, which I mentioned earlier.
We have 2 more comments on the chat.
Mhm.
Oscar says, I enjoy your perspective on AI, where it shouldn't be used as a solution, but rather that you have to understand the issue and then use it to help with your issue. I was wondering, as you move forward with looking further, what other applications can it be used for in different fields of technology?
You need to be creative. So it's my personal take is it's not it's a very powerful and useful new method, but it's in most applications it's not going to be a game changer. So because of all these limitations we have, it can be especially useful as an explorative method to create new hypotheses that we can test using rigorous statistical analysis later. Applications can be finding new features in the data, a visualization of complex data with a lot of different variables. This allows us to include different types of data into a single analysis. We can, for example, combine images with numerical data, with absence presence data, and so on and so forth, feed it into a single model, and then plot this whole thing into in 2 dimensions, and this kind of thing. So it's very flexible and it's very powerful, but we also have to be very careful with interpreting it, because we often, as it gets more complex, we cannot accurately see anymore what the model actually has learned and what the decisions are based on.
And I think that the last comment.
Okay, by Umid, yeah. Okay. Yeah, the idea is to use large language models to pre-train as a pre-trained model for our task, but yeah, I think that does not address the core issue, because this large language model will not know what features we are interested in and what features we are not interested in. So we have to use another approach to pre-train the model.
Yes, I'm sorry I interrupted you, because in large language models, we are not care about these things that you are saying, because they are trained on huge and massive data set. Okay, so we can use some, because it's very difficult. It's trying to talk about LLMs in depth, but they have a strong ability to work, because, for instance, working on, for instance, medical image, okay, and other medical application, or other visual, for instance, vision, or other. So we. So I'm sorry. Can you hear me?
We cannot hear you very well.
Now can you hear me? Yes?
Yes.
I'm sorry. I was saying that because LLMs are pre-trained models, they are trained on massive and huge data set, okay? So since, for instance, we are working on LLM, the idea is that we don't care about the data set that we are using, because they trained on a huge data set, and they use in different tasks, for instance, for time series prediction, classification, image classification. So there are some tests that we use. For instance, we use VLM, that is for this specific task working. So I think because talking about LLM now is very, but I'm sure that maybe if this data set is complex, the patterns is very complex. So maybe we can use LLM because there are some, for instance, VLM, we can use Vision LLM and something like this that we can try. It helps to improve the accuracy or something like this. So it's a kind of idea for future.
Yeah, I think that wouldn't help us in this case because these LNMs don't have any information on the problems we want to solve. So the LMNs can maybe distinguish images, but we don't want to distinguish images. We want to detect the anatomical features we are interested in. And this is not something an LLM has any idea of. So no, maybe it can improve accuracy, but I'm not optimistic that this will make a difference.
Because they, as I told you, for instance, they use for object detection and many tasks. And also there are, for instance, you can use fine-tune for your task. When you use fine-tuning, it means that you use for your task, okay? So maybe we can talk about it later, but maybe it can be an option.
It's certainly an option if we use like photographs, something very complex. For these outlines that I use, yeah, as I said, the data is just too different. But for images, certainly, yeah.
Well, thank you. Do we have another question or comment for Jens? Okay. Well, it was a great talk. Thank you for sharing this with us. And thank you everyone for joining today. We are going to upload this talk next week in our YouTube channel, and we will meet next month. I'm going to send you the information about our next talk as soon as possible. So thank you again, and I hope you all have a great weekend. Thank you, Jens, again.
Thank you. Thank you a lot.